Hi, and welcome to our 19th class on the Christian Basics, or for my Lutheran teenagers out there, Confirmation. Every week we aim to bring you biblical content that will help you in your new or emerging walk with Christ. I'm Evan McClanahan. I'm the pastor down at First Lutheran in Houston, and this week we're continuing our look at Luther's Small Catechism, specifically focusing on Commandments 4 through 10 of the 10 Commandments. Let's roll. Well, before we begin this week, I actually realized that I may have been using some words or names that weren't very familiar to you last week. So a very, very brief history lesson. When we talk about Martin Luther or Lutherans, we're talking about someone who in the 16th century, 1500s, tried to reform the Catholic Church. The Reformation, as it's called, really began in 1517, when Martin Luther tried to reform a practice known as the selling of indulgences, which kind of like you could pay to get people out of purgatory, which is a place that you would go before you would go into heaven. Anyway, he objected to that, and that sort of began. The question was really, how am I righteous before a holy God? But over time, the Reformation looked at the authority of the church and much broader questions. So those who follow the teachings of Martin Luther from the 1500s are called Lutherans, and that's who he was. This document, the Small Catechism, was written really to instruct those who began to follow him and follow his teachings. But as I said last week, he realized there was a lot of knowledge that they still needed, so this really covers the basics of the faith. Well, back to the 10 Commandments. Remember that last time we talked about how the commandments could be broken up into sort of two tables, one dealing with our relationship to God and one dealing with our relationship to our neighbor. This is what Jesus says about that in Matthew, the 22nd chapter. In one of them, a lawyer asked him a question to test him. "Teacher, which is the great commandment in the law?" And he said to him, "You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your mind. This is the great and first commandment, and a second is like it. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. On these two commandments depend all the law and the prophets." See, those two summary statements are really summaries of the whole law, the whole 10 Commandments anyway. The first three deal with our relationship to God, honoring the Sabbath, not having any false gods, not taking the name of God in vain. And then the second table of the law deals with how we relate to our neighbor, being faithful to our spouse and honoring our parents and not stealing and murdering and that sort of thing. So that's what we're looking at today, that second table of the law. Now, before we begin, we do see that Luther offers really some of his most brilliant insights here, in that he looks at each commandment not as just a negative command, as in what you should not do, but a positive command as well, which is implied. In other words, this is what you're not to do, so that implies that this is what you are to do. So with each of these commandments, notice both the negative teaching and the positive application. So the fourth commandment, honor your father and mother. What does this mean? Answer, we should fear and love God, that we may not despise nor anger our parents and masters, but give them honor, serve, obey, and hold them in love and esteem. In truth, all of civilization really rests on this commandment. If we don't respect and honor those who have gone before us, we really don't have a civilization. We just got a whole bunch of people running around thinking that they know best. We're so convinced today that it's good to challenge the assumptions of those who have gone before us that we really have to kind of relearn what it is to honor those who have come before us before we dare to make our own improvements. At a minimum, this means we seek to learn from our elders and we show them obedience first. Assume nothing of your own greatness. Show some wisdom. Listen to those who are older than you. Seek to learn from them. It's good for you. It's good for them. It's good for everybody. Don't be that young know-it-all. No one likes that person. The fifth commandment, you shall not murder. What does this mean? We should fear and love God, that we may not hurt nor harm our neighbor in his body, but help and befriend him in every bodily need. Well, notice there again, it's not enough just not to kill. We're actually to look out for our neighbor and make sure that they have everything that they need. Probably none of us have actually killed anybody, but have we done our best to help those who are in need? Now, it should be noted that this commandment is really a reference to murder. It's different from killing. God actually commands killing at times in the Bible, like in some of the warfare passages in Joshua. This is really about murdering someone out of anger, planning to take someone's life. But don't think because you've never murdered someone that you have this one licked. Jesus teaches us that to be angry with someone in our hearts is to commit murder against them. So you definitely need to guard your heart in times of anger so that you don't break this commandment. And by the way, we'll be talking about this later. We'll have a whole video on the topic of abortion, but people will often say that the Bible doesn't speak to the question of abortion, to which I would say, yes, it does. It's right here in this commandment. The taking of a life just because it's in the womb doesn't change the fact that it's a violation of the commandment not to murder. The sixth commandment, you shall not commit adultery. What does this mean? Answer, we should fear and love God that we may lead a chaste and decent life in words and deeds, and each love and honor our spouse. While adultery does remain a persistent problem in our society today, there is a certain reality that there may be many more ways to commit adultery than there were in Martin Luther's day. For example, one of the grave problems of our own society is the prevalence of pornography. Internet pornography and looking at it and participating in it in any way, it is a violation of this commandment of adultery. For Jesus says, if you lust after another person in your heart, then you have committed adultery with them. You have broken this commandment. So Christians really cannot call themselves a Christian if they are habitually participating in pornography. And of course, if they're in any way participating in adultery in the old-fashioned sense. The seventh commandment, you shall not steal. What does this mean? Well, we should fear and love God that we may not take our neighbor's money or property, nor get them by false wear or dealing, but help him to improve and protect his property and business. Well, there are many ways to steal in the internet age as well. It's not just walking over to someone's house and leaving with something that is theirs. But Luther's admonition to help people keep what is theirs in the positive sense is very helpful as well. And theft doesn't just take place between, say, two persons. It can take place at an institutional level as well. We're going to do a whole video about sort of good government. But one of the things that can easily happen is that theft can be institutionalized by government, by taking an undue burden of your wealth through taxation or through unjust laws, for example. So those are things that as a citizen you actually want to work against as well to help your neighbor keep what is his so that you don't violate the commandment against stealing. You know, if you work to take what is your neighbor's by government taxation and redistribution, you actually may very well be guilty, at least in your heart, of the commandment against stealing. Now, the eighth commandment, you shall not bear false witness against your neighbor. What does this mean? We should fear and love God that we may not deceitfully belie, betray, slander, or defame our neighbor, but defend him, speak well of him, and put the best construction on everything. Well, not to lie about someone should be pretty easy, but dear old Brother Martin, he goes a step further with his positive commandment that I think all of us probably find a lot more difficult. He says that we're not to spread gossip, we're not to spread rumors, we're not to pass things along that we've heard if we don't know that they're true, and maybe even if we do know they're true, we shouldn't harm someone's reputation. But do we really go out of our way to put the best construction on something that we do hear or even observe about a person? Often we don't have the full context of a situation, and we don't really know what's fully going on. And so putting the best construction on any situation as a habit is a very powerful reminder and a very powerful way not to violate the commandment of bearing false witness against our neighbor. The ninth commandment, you shall not covet your neighbor's house. What does this mean? We should fear and love God that we may not craftily sneak to get our neighbor's inheritance or house and obtain it by a show of justice and right, etc., but help and be of service to him in keeping it. You know, given that the home improvement industry is a huge multi-billion-dollar industry in America, it's pretty clear that we actually do have a problem wanting what our neighbors have. But we are called to be content with what we have. To covet what other people have is actually a way of saying to God, well, geez, God, you haven't given me enough. What you've given me is insufficient. I can never be happy with what you have given me because you haven't given me what they have. So when you're tempted to covet, someone's got a really nice car, really nice house, whatever the case may be, offer a prayer of thanks instead. And consider as well the holiness that is implied in this command. It's not enough to not walk to your neighbor's house and take their stuff. God actually wants you in your heart to not want their stuff, but again, to be content with what God has given you. Now, the 10th commandment, thou shalt not covet thy neighbor's wife, nor his manservant, nor his maidservant, nor his cattle, nor anything that is his. What does this mean? We should fear and love God that we may not estrange, force, or entice away our neighbor's wife, servants, or cattle, but urge them to stay and diligently do their duty. Well, like the previous commandment, this commandment demonstrates that just refraining from adultery doesn't really meet God's standard. God also wants you to refrain from wanting your neighbor's spouse, I think we can say as well, not just wife, but spouse, in your mind and heart as well. So whenever you see your neighbor's spouse and their things, their household, you should really think about how you can help their marriage and help them keep what they have rather than scheming of a way to dissolve their marriage. Well, I believe these commandments are for all people at all times. They will help all of us lead a much more fruitful life. A teacher once said that if we honor the 10 commandments, it will help our neighbor have our best life now, not just us, which is the focus of so much Christian teaching now, is how we can have our best life now. But be obedient to these commandments, memorize them, think of them, use them in your prayer life, and if you follow them, I promise you will have a fruitful and joyful life, and your neighbor will too. Well, next week we continue our look at the Small Catechism, the Apostles' Creed in particular. You can email me at christianbasicsclass@gmail.com. Go to the church website, flhouston.org, for other videos or for the worksheets. And until next time, take care.